Africa Business News, proudly sponsored by EY.
Africa, it is huge, it is diverse, and its business landscape fascinating and dynamic. And that's our business here on your favorite weekly African business stop. Boni Tunya brings us the latest from Nairobi. Christy Cole Popola is in Lagos, and Christine Mundwa joins us here in Johannesburg. My name is Victor Homoeswana, and this is the Africa Business News. Mambo Boni, in East African news over the week, low-cost airline FastJet raised over $70 million to fund expansion in the Ethiopian flower industry is blooming, but it is impossible to overlook the bombing in Garissa near the border with Somalia. Please update us on the situation and how the markets have reacted to this tragedy.
Well, Victor, as everyone expects, this could have been the longest and the saddest Easter that Kenya has ever had to experience. But just to bring you today to what has happened between Thursday and today is that the Kenyan Air Force bombed 2 Shabaab camps in Somalia on Sunday, and the Kenyan Defense Force source has confirmed that in the first major military response to last week's attack by the militant group on a Kenya University, Victor. And the jets pounded on the campus in Gondodowe and Ismail, both in Somalia, both in the Goda region bordering Kenya. And the military sources say that on Monday, cloud cover made it difficult to establish how much damage the bombings caused, the estimated death toll in Somalia. But Victor, this is on account of gunmen from the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab that launched an early morning attack that killed 148 people on Thursday when they stormed the Garissa University College campus some 200 kilometers from the Somali border. Victor, 79 people sustained injury and as a result of the attack and receiving treatment from different hospitals. The Kenyan government has named Mohammed Mohamud, also known as Duliadin or Gamadere, as the mastermind of Thursday's university terror attack. Earlier, the ministry posted a most wanted notice for Mohamud, and it offers a reward of 20 million Kenyan shillings for his head, dead or alive, Victor.
Well, FastJet has furiously made headlines over the past 12 months, moving into the East African airspace. Now the low-cost airline has raised over $70 million to fund expansion. How big is the footprint of FastJet, Boni, relative to established airlines like Kenya Airways or Ethiopian Airlines? Or is it a factor only to the likes of Fly 540?
Well, Victor, the FastJet story remains to be a very interesting one, at least in respect to the East African aviation space. The EasyJet-backed low-cost African airline has raised £70 million to expand its fleet of 3 aircraft to open up new routes. Now, the company sold just about 5 billion shares at £1 each, and a near 15% discount of its shares price ahead of the placing. The fundraising will more than triple its existing market capitalization of around £20 million, Victor. But if you look keenly, FastJet, which was launched in November of 2012, currently operates solely in Tanzania and has identified 5 countries for future expansion. These would be Kenya, South Africa, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And it maintains ambitions of becoming a Pan-African airline. But Victor, the company has said in numerous occasions that by 2018, around a third of its fleet would be leased and a third equally financed and a further third of debt finance. Obviously a very ambitious pronouncement coming out of the company.
Things keep looking better for aviation in East Africa and obviously the ease of doing business. Thank you very much, Boni Tunya from Nairobi in Kenya. Up next is Southern Africa. We're still on Africa Business News and Christine Mundwa is with me in studio. South Africans went into the Easter weekend cringing after the massive fuel price hike, although I doubt that would have dampened the spirit. In Zimbabwe, the smaller but significant network operator Telecel scrambles to salvage operations as the government there is still finalizing its ICT policy. But we kick off with matters mining related after the Minister of Mineral Resources in South Africa, Ngwakora Mahlodi, looked to the courts to determine what could be a clear directive by South Africa's Black Economic Empowerment or BE codes Christine, last week we saw Minister Ramatlhodi go into the courts to determine what could clearly be looked up in the codes, because it's there, it's clear who complies with BEE in mining and who doesn't. Why would he need to go to courts for that?
Well, the situation here is that, so by now, all mining companies should have achieved 26% black ownership. Right. But the scenario that is being put here is that if a mining company had, of course, given shares to a BEE partner, and that BEE partner sells those shares to another company, does the mining company have to go back and effect another BEE transition? Or does the rule that says once compliant, always compliant stand? And this is what the bone of contention essentially is. So now they're going to the courts, the Supreme Court, we understand, that's going to effectively give this ruling on whether or not the principle of once empowered, always empowered applies. But I think the big question will be is once that Supreme Court ruling comes down is will anybody appeal? Of course, the nature of the industry is such that you're dealing with individual miners. So others could accept it, but others could potentially appeal. Government in the Department of Mineral Resources could potentially appeal as well.
Doesn't make sense to me. Do you have black shareholders or do you not? If you don't have them, you don't have them, right? Well, I don't know. I think the problem is sometimes people buy shares in companies and then sell just to try and profit. But in the end, I don't think there's any question. If you have black shareholding, you have. If you don't, you have. But let's start with mining matters. In Zambia last week, Edgar Lungu, the president, instructing the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Mining, to resolve the standoff regarding the taxation there, the royalties versus the dividends and all the kinds of taxing of the mining in Zambia. He gave them a deadline of April the 8th. It's fast approaching. Do you think they'll make it?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, this regime alone didn't make the deadline. In fact, it's exceeded that by months. But it is important that they meet this deadline. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the industry already because of this uncertainty, we're already hearing of some of the producers holding back on investment plans. I mean, for instance, we have here First Quantum Minerals. This investment plan is to the tune of billions. They're suspended that until such time as we have clarity. Now, of course, there are efforts to diversify the Zambian economy, but one can make no mistake about the contribution that it adds to this country's economy. And so, missing deadlines and further putting the industry under more uncertainty isn't going to be good at all.
Most of the miners that I spoke to in Zambia saying this standoff is just not good. Already the DRC overtaking Zambia as the producer of copper on the continent. Christine Munda, thank you very much for joining us. Next up out of Lagos, Nigeria is Christy Cole Popola. Christy Cole, Nigeria has surpassed prediction that it could split this year and survive its most keenly contested presidential elections, which saw power ceded to the opposition for the first time in the country's 16-year democracy. But it's not yet Uhuru, is it? On Saturday, Nigerians once again go to the polls to elect governors for all 36 states. From what you see now, can Nigeria sustain this peace and stability?
Well, Victor, first of all, no one saw this current peace coming, and I'm talking about the peace that has now followed the presidential and National Assembly elections. But then President Jonathan's early positive response and concession of victory has been analyzed by various sections of the media and described as largely responsible for the peace and has even been tagged heroic. Now, in the lead up to the governorship polls, we have seen elements of the keen competition that trailed the presidential elections, increased aggressive campaigns, lobbying, and the use of ethnic affiliations. The latest of that, of course, is coming from Lagos, which is one of the 4 states considered a must-win for both major political parties in Nigeria. You must know now that Lagos has been governed by the opposition for the entire post-military stretch since 1999. As usual, it is the center of controversy due partly to keen contestation from the PDP and, of course, the latest outburst credited to the traditional ruler of Lagos that Easterners living in Lagos must vote his favored party has also heated up the polity at the moment. But then generally there's been calls to keep the peace as the presidential elections have already set the pace. But as the Saturday's elections inch closer, we are beginning to see people indeed hold their breath.
Christy Cole, on the back of the Shabaab also on the university in Garissa, tell us about ECOWAS and ECAs and the meeting they're likely to have and what sort of issues are expected to come up.
African leaders from West and Central Africa will be meeting in Malabo, at the capital of Equatorial Guinea, tomorrow to discuss on ways to combat the terror group Boko Haram in the continent. Now, although activities of the terror group were largely contained pre-elections, the group has launched about 3 attacks in Nigeria's northeast since last Saturday. Now, the summit is expected to discuss ways to tackle Boko Haram, which West and Central Africa believe could destabilize the region due to increasingly bloody attacks on Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and of course Chad. We also expect that the countries will put to rest whatever diplomatic issues may spring up between Nigeria and Chad over who did more job initially repelling Boko Haram. There's also the rumors on allowances Nigeria is paying to the Chadian soldiers. We expect that all these issues will be laid to rest at that summit holding tomorrow.
That leads us to this week's trivia. To test your knowledge of Africa, we also put Christy Cole and Bonnie on the spot to pick their favorite stocks of the week from their respective regions. Stay with Africa Business News. Time for our stock pick, Bonnie and Christy Cole. If I want to invest in your region this week, which share would you advise me to buy and why? Let's start with you, Christy Cole.
UACN, definitely very impressive results just came in now. The initial volatility of the FX market was expected to impact the stocks negatively, but we didn't see that happen. The results instead show steady growth in all key lines, top and bottom. Most importantly, the results show resilience to factors that could have pulled it down, from diversification all the way to market volatility. How
about you, Bonnie, in Nairobi?
Well, Victor, I'll put my money in oil retailer Total Kenya. Obviously, if you're looking at volumes, they've had more customers trickling into their service stations on account of falling global fuel prices. But looking at the company's numbers, we saw the Total's numbers rise to almost 16% in the last financial year's numbers. 26 is the price per share, going up just about 8%. Obviously a good year. With the sort of falling global prices, we expect more people to be lining up. So this is a good counter.
We move to our trivia. In our trivia this week, tell me, Bonnie and Christy Cole, which country observes Genocide Memorial Day on April 7th? The only clue I can give you is that the event being commemorated took place in 1994.
Sounds like Rwanda.
Rwanda, you got it right. I'm impressed. Probably one of Africa's most gruesome events in the history of the land of 1,000 hills. That's Rwanda. The killing of close to 1 million people, mainly Tutsis and moderate Hutus, took place for about 3 months, starting on April 7th. The genocide was triggered by the death of the then President Juvenal Habyarimana in a plane crash that also claimed the life of his Burundian counterpart. Since then, however, Rwanda has recovered and become a shining example on how to turn adversity into opportunity. The country is now a leader in many respects, including the ease of doing business, safety, and cleanliness. We're back with you next week with more Africa Business News. We thank Christy Cole Popol out of Lagos, Bonnie Tunya in Nairobi, and earlier on Christine Munda here in Johannesburg. Stay tuned to CNBC Africa. Until next week, cheers.